And then, okay. So welcome everybody. This is the June version of our series, Net Zero is Not Enough. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Friedman and Herman. They both have PhDs in psychology. I learned as I looked up their bios on LinkedIn. So they're co-founders of the Enterprise Development Group. That's a business consulting group that's based in Palo Alto, California. They work with leaders of companies, including startups and investors around the world, that aim to create a sustainable future together in these times of dramatic disruption. They've co-authored a book together, The Dynamic Enterprise, Tools for Turning Chaos into Strategy and Strategy into Action. They've led speaker series and workshops around the world with current focus on rapid innovation for climate restoration. And this evening, it's evening here. I think they're in Hawaii, where it's probably mid-afternoon. Today, they're going to talk to us about leadership for climate solutions, opportunities in the emerging regenerative economy. So go ahead and share your screen, Lisa and Herman, and we're all ears.
Fantastic. It's really wonderful to see you all. And we are going to talk about leadership and for climate solutions, and we're going to kind of use materials in part that you're quite familiar with, and we're going to show you how we reframe those in a way that mobilizes a kind of motivation on the part of leaders to actually step in with greater urgency and more motivation into this emerging reality. So that's really our intent today. Maybe you could.
I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. So we are co-founders and partners in EDG, which stands for Enterprise Development Group. And we tend to do a couple of things. So we've helped leaders across all kinds of industries look at what's their business strategy and organization strategy for the future. But we start by looking at where's the world going? Like whether you go there or not, the world is on the move, things are happening. So early in our careers, we would just start with vision and strategy, and often it just would not be enough of a stretch for what was needed. So you'll see that later. We'll talk about what are the signals of the future? What do we really see? And when we pay attention to those, we really get what those things mean. At that point, what does it tell us to do for our work, for how we're organized, who we work with? We also have done a lot of work in innovation best practices. As you know, kind of all of us around the Bay Area are part of Silicon Valley. And so people from all over the world come to want to innovate with us. And so we've looked at what are some of the best practices about when you're creating something that hasn't existed, how do you innovate? And what does it mean for future-driven leadership? We work with clients all around the world, but all kinds of different industries. So it's been from universities, healthcare, buildings and construction, BP, when they were going in to create BP Solar, which they started in California. Almost anything that moves, airlines, trains, cars, electric motorcycles, Panera Bread, when they were spreading around the country.
And typically when we work with these companies, particularly when it's a massive transformation, we work with them over some length of period of time. So some of them we work with for 10 to 12 years.
So it goes anywhere from workshops to deeper programs where people are looking at what they want to do together and getting their partners engaged to over a decade.
So as we talked about a little bit earlier already, it's about sort of stepping into these moments of disruption and transformation and finding ways to expand what's possible, what people think is possible, what is actually required to shift from this moment of disruption into a moment of significance, of greatness. And, of course, that's what is also our background. In a minute, you're going to see how we reframe the whole climate reality situation in that kind of way to mobilize that kind of energy.
So we've written a lot as we go along. You talked about the book Dynamic Enterprise before, which is about strategy. And toward the end, we're going to talk about what are some of the tools and practices that leaders can use to mobilize people to join in with them around climate strategies and climate actions. So dynamic enterprise was something that you'll hear more about. What's our blueprint process for that? Co-star is about getting innovation and how to create a pitch. Once you've got great ideas, but you need to pitch it either for people to join you or fund you. And then lots of other articles you'll hear about. Foresight Shock was a chapter for a book in France, and that was, you'll hear some things about that, and also Another Planet.
So here, just quickly, what we're thinking about this 45 minutes or so that we're going to be talking with you, and then followed by question and answers. But fundamentally, as I already pointed out, it's about reframing the narrative that guides leaders to transform their enterprise and commit to a regenerative impact at speed and scale. Like, how do we mobilize this kind of energy that allows us to see the crisis for what it is, to sort of resonate with the shocking reality of what we're facing in a way that then allows us to lead into that future in a way that really speaks to it again at the scale that is required. So we're going to talk about the crisis and the opportunities. Some of that will feel familiar to you. Then what are the signals that we're beginning to see in the business world about this is a transformation that's really happening? And then we're going to close with some fundamental practices about how we step into this regenerative era. We're in Silicon Valley. It's a cool place to come from and to be in, right? There's a tremendous energy going on.
And people look to Silicon Valley from all over the world for solutions. So, and plus what we found is that people come to work with us from lots of different countries. And somehow when they get to any part of the Bay Area, right, which is like Silicon Valley, they've come here, they allow themselves to be more creative and more entrepreneurial. So one of the things that we know is that there are times where, if we look at these curves, that there's times where it's a real shift in eras, and often it's been technology that's advanced that from agriculture to industrial era, and then we've been around for the digital era. And so we're really looking at what are these times that are big shifts, where it's not just one industry or another or making something better, but where it's a complete shift in the way everything is done. And now we're seeing, even from the first generation digital with social and mobile, now everything's getting smart and connected and predictive. It tells us what's coming. Right. Now, just in the last month or two, seeing these real breakthroughs with AI, and we can talk to all of it in our natural language. And what we're seeing is that it's every industry. When it's the shift in eras, it's not just one company or another, but how everything is now getting smart and connected.
So just quickly a background to start thinking about what does it mean to lead into that reality. We're pretty good at that in Silicon Valley, right? That there's a special dynamic here where there's a constant of reorientation to what is this future. Now it's AI, or it's about climate tech. It's about these kind of things that are being developed by startups, and that large companies are also picking up and reorienting themselves around.
And so this is one of the first tools that we've used really for decades now, about a blueprint for seeing the future together. How do you get people literally all on the same page? And so first of all, that we can agree on where is the world going, and then who we want to become in this world. And the who is not just what we want to do. It's not just our strategy. It's not just our business strategy, our organization, but who is deep values of who we are. And what's our core identity? What do we stand for in that future? And then how will we get there? Who are all of the people we need to build this together with? How do we get all of us aligned? How do we get us coordinated and organized and managed so that we can go off? And you see those yellow circles at the right, so that we build into that space together and make that future happen.
And these are really obvious questions, obvious orientations. But the point is, when there's sort of this fundamental transformation, having that conversation in the company overall, and getting everybody involved in saying, we see the same world. We are understanding who we need to become in that world together. These are really fundamental reorientations of the fundamental narrative that get people to then commit to these kind of things. And typically that's
often it's very large wall maps. When we say getting people on the same page, it's often a very large page. And what you can see in the middle is you see those curves, because we work a lot with these transformational moments. And so these two participants had found hats as props for themselves. So you can see the blue curve on the left and the red curve of the future. And so it's kind of, we're at the height of the blue curve. We're the leaders in the world as it is now. But there's this new era starting underneath. And these are kind of new world and the old world beginning to talk together about how they're going to bridge this transformational moment, and then presenting it to the leadership team, who are the audience.
So another element, so this ability to reorient ourselves to the future in a way that Lisa just described, and then seeing signals, interpreting them and saying, okay, now how does that impact how we rethink where we're heading? You know, what's coming our way is really fundamental to our Silicon Valley sort of way of being. And, you know, a typical impulse is when something inside our heads goes, wait, what? What's this? And what we're letting people know is when you have that wait, what moment, take it seriously, step into it and see how that might impact everything you do.
Yeah, really try to understand, what is it?
Yeah. So the wait what, of course, of last week was this, and a lot of people had a wait what moment, of course, in New York, right? We had that experience a few years back in San Francisco, but for the New Yorkers, it was really new. And what's so interesting is that when that happens, people use words like apocalyptic, right? We used that 2 years ago. This year, it was New York's time to say that.
Well, and I think this had an emotional impact on people. So this was 10 a.m. For any of you that were here, you know that this is because of fires that were 2.5 hours away from us. And yet that's what our sky looked like. You know, for us, we were in Palo Alto, but in San Francisco, everyone we talked to around the Bay Area, that's what our sky looked like. And it has an emotional impact on people. And people have told us that from New York as well. When it was just gray, they're kind of used to gray clouds, gray fog. When the sky was red, they knew this is a different time. And it actually really impacted people in a very different way.
We've had very different conversations with East Coasters.
And then there's times where there's too much water. Floods all over in China. I think the picture on the top right of the guy who's standing in the subway car, you know, up to his chest in water is quite moving. In Pakistan, it was 1/3 of the country underwater at the same time. Arizona is actually has just in the last week started to limit home building in Phoenix. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States, right? They're limiting future home building because they just don't have enough water there.
Greenland, the warmest it's been in 1,000 years, right? Just extraordinary pieces of information that we're getting. And, you know, when we work with corporate leaders, we talk about these things. We just bring in these kind of signals and say, here you go, here's a signal. And, you know, Greenland melting 100 times faster than estimated. This is a glacier that's covered with soot, right? So it has 0 albedo effect left, right? So that just heats up that glacier underneath all that black surface. It's an extraordinary...
So albedo meaning it's the white surface that reflects light.
I'm from Switzerland. You may have noticed my accent. This is what Switzerland looked like this winter, right? This is going skiing in Switzerland this year. Incredible. The snow cannons no longer function. So this was just sort of the accumulation in sort of the main parts of the slopes.
Just amazing pictures for us to see, just to see that people are still trying to ski down these little highways of manufactured snow.
But not enough manufactured snow. So what do humans do? They bring in helicopters with snow, right? For a race that's going to be conducted. Madness, right? But that's what we do. We kind of just make it work somehow without really looking at the bigger picture. So here then we like to transition to say, here are the signals. What's that about? And so with leaders, we then take them into a deep dive into what you all are quite familiar with, because we start with basically a climate reality orientation, right? We have a lifestyle. That lifestyle is only possible because of this.
This should be really familiar for you about how we've gone deep into the ground. We dig for these fossil fuels. We bring them up. We use them for everything we do, things that move, the things that we make, we've used them, and then we put it up into the air.
And so while we know we've done that, we've used the oil, the coal, the natural gas, we have this fantasy that, oh, well, look at that, we're going to get this all replaced best by 50% by 2030. But in the meantime, this is what the actual trajectory looks like of, where we get our energy from.
This was actually surprising for me when I saw it, even though I've been looking at this data for quite a while, to see how small that renewables is, because you'll hear that something increased 50% from what we had last year. but to actually recognize how we are still so much 85% in this fossil fuel and traditional economy where we're still putting greenhouse gas
And
out
I mean,
into the air.
if you look at ChatGPT, it has an extraordinary energy footprint, right? And so we're going to just have to cover that up with these new energy sources, but that doesn't really help that much. So this is another one from Climate Reality. So we're making the point to these leaders that, you know, we're putting 162 billion tons in. Again, all this stuff is familiar to you. The thing about the nuclear bomb, 600,000 of first generation bombs. So we use that again to kind of make it, again, you're familiar with that. And then the point here being, look, we're putting all that stuff into the atmosphere, but only 40% can be reabsorbed by nature. 60% remains up there. And that by now is at 1,000 gigatons that are just sitting up there, persistent molecules that are sitting there for hundreds of years, thousands of years, that no matter what we do on the ground, if we all start driving Teslas and using solar energy, it's still the same, right?
Right. So it's just, and I think that's confusing for lots of people that they'll say, oh, we're going to be zero emissions, or look how much better we're doing. We're not putting more up there, or we're slowing down how fast we're still putting it in the atmosphere. But to understand, it's the trillion tons we've already put up that is causing all those things. When we had the early slides about, we're already starting to feel the effects. We knew things were coming. They're now coming. They're here. And that's because what's already up there. So reducing emissions will not be enough at
so
this point.
This fits perfectly with the intent of this series of workshops, right? Net zero is not enough. And that's really our message to these leaders is net zero is not enough. These commitments you're making to net zero while still putting up 36 gigatons is not going to make it work. We have to get them to be conscious that it's what's up there, the persistent CO2 that's already up there. And, you know, that's also another really important picture for them to see that, you know, throughout human history and long before, for millions of years, the CO2 content of the atmosphere was between 175 and 290 parts per million. And then in 1950, based on all our industrialization and what we did, we broke through that ceiling for the first time in millions of years, right? And by now we're
5 years. It's been between those two lines.
And as of June 11th, we have been at 424 parts. And that meant that just in 1 year, we have increased that number by 3.63 parts.
Time that increases, what we know is there's been no human alive at this number, right? So
again, these are all familiar to you, but we want to give you a feel for how we work with leaders to kind of make them aware of what it is we're facing here together. You know, we then can remind them that we actually know what the world looked like at 400 parts per million, right? It was 3 to 4 degrees warmer, Celsius warmer than it is now. Water was 60 feet higher than it is today. There was no Florida, you know, the Northern Hemisphere was ice-free and water seas were in 80 miles. So
there's actually, so we've seen a wonderful video by Maureen Ramo, who started the climate school at Columbia University in New York. And it shows someone working with her and saying, well, if Florida was underwater when we had this level of greenhouse gas, why is Florida there today? Why isn't it underwater now? And she says, well, it's the frozen lasagna effect. It's like you take a lasagna out of your freezer and you put it into the oven and you set the temperature at 350 or 425 or whatever you're going to set it for. And you come back and you put it in, you check 10 minutes later, it's still frozen. 20 minutes later, well, that's quite as much, it's still frozen. And after a while, it starts to thaw. And you know that when you've set that thermostat, you know what's going to happen. You know the lasagna is going to cook. It just takes a while to get there.
So again, these are all triggers in our work with leaders to sort of make them begin to see in a relatively short period of time what the reality is of that, of what we're facing here together. This being another really powerful piece of our reality. So it's nobody thinks about.
Yeah, it's not just the heat, but it's also what are we doing to the oceans then that are absorbing that? And this was from a study that said they were absorbing 1/3 of the CO2 that's getting added to the atmosphere. And when the water absorbs it, it gets converted into carbonic acid, which makes the oceans much more acidic. And that at the current rates that there will be 170% more acidic by the end of the century. And that's too acidic for 97% of our ocean life. So we want to just like stop and take a breath for that, because we don't, you know, there's so many of the slides that we've seen through climate reality. And then, but when you hear something like that and you say, it's not what we meant to do, right? We're just leading our normal everyday life the way we've learned how to lead it. We're not trying to kill 97% of the life in the ocean. And we need to understand when that's something that we're doing, that we can just take it in and let that sink in.
So far we've been talking about this trajectory, right? Things are getting hotter, things are getting more acidified, things are getting drier, wetter, all the things we're all familiar with. And then we close by talking about, and then there's the tipping points, right?
So this is actually, for me personally, one of the most powerful images I've seen. And that's because this is where the permafrost is melting in northern lands, northern Canada, northern parts of Europe, into Russia. And so we've been, for decades, right? We've been digging deep into the ground to get methane, or just natural gas, and to spend billions of dollars to bring it up into the air. Well, now as the permafrost melts, all that organic material underneath, the methane's letting itself out. It's having these explosions. And so there's a number of methane holes, and you can kind of see how big they are. So even at some point, that's why even if we start reducing our emissions, if we cannot cool our planet, if we cannot get the CO2 out of the air and get us back to where we've been, then it keeps going. So the warmer it gets, the more permafrost melts, the more it melts, the more methane we get, exploding up into the air. The more it goes up, the warmer it gets. And that's where it makes it a tipping point, that the more it goes, the more it goes.
So talking about permafrost is, these methane holes, at least, which was talking about, there's explosive holes in the ground. And then we have these thaw slumps. And what's been really stunning is that a study out of ETH Zurich actually went to the Tamir Peninsula, and they found that between 2010 and 2021, there was a 43-fold increase of these slumps, right? That's just an unimaginable kind of reality about just how quickly and how large, how great this thaw is that's happening.
Which is what tells us that something's the timeline of how urgent it is, even more, even from the time that climate reality was formed until now.
So we are kind of wrapping this part of the conversation up with this proposition. Now we're moving then into the, okay, so now we're going to do about it, right? But this is a great sort of message from Antonio Guterres, where he says humanity is on a highway to climate hell. We are in the fight for our lives, and we are losing, right? How can you not look at these methane holes? How can you not look at this story about the acidification of the oceans, and not realize this is a big thing? We really are in the fight for our lives, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. So that's kind of the closing of this part of it with our leadership, with the leaders we talk to, and then we basically put them on notice that we are the first generation to know.
So, my parents didn't know this. My grandparents didn't know this. So we are that first generation to really know this and to put this story together. And we are also, when you see how fast things are going and speeding up, we are the last generation to be able to do something about it. So it's us. So we need to act with speed and with scale.
That's related and relevant to what we just talked about, right? So, so the question then becomes, how do we figure out what to do? What are the actions we need to do? And so here we do a kind of reframe where we say, look, we all are just, what an amazing place we live on, right? It's an extraordinary, beautiful blue marble. And somewhere we are holding on to the notion that this is still the place that we're on, right? And that there's just a little tweaking we need to do. Let's stop our emissions and it'll be okay, right? That's what a lot of people are carrying around. But really, we are finding ourselves on a new planet, on a different planet. The idea there is to kind of get to the impulse of humans that if they land on a place that is unfamiliar, let's say we land on Mars or something, and we say, boy, this is interesting. It's got just about the right level of gravity, but the air can't be breathed. What are we going to do to fix
so close to being livable, but not really.
Quite right. We go to work, right? And that's the impulse we want to generate, is how can we innovate our way back to Earth, right? Is the concept here. So that was just a perfect picture. Net zero is clearly not enough from the story we just heard, right? So the question of how do we turn Earth into a livable planet again is about not just reducing what we're putting up. Yes, we have to do that. Undoubtedly, it's ridiculous that we're putting up, 36 billion tons of CO2 a year. We have to stop that. but we also have to remove it. And given what we just learned about the methane holes and all those things, we have to actively cool things. We have to start to think about how can we cool cities? How can we cool glaciers? What can we do?
And those technologies are new and kind of more unknown.
Will take some time.
About number 1 and number 2, but people are starting to look at number 3 just because we need any of those tools we can get.
So then we have to, of course, still adapt to the reality, because this is not just going to go away. We're not going to be fast enough to deal with all that. And then restoration, right? So when we reduce, we have all a sense of what that looks like. Removal means, actively, Project Drawdown is
we'll come back to some
things.
Of these examples to give to tell you more about
a
what
lot of nature-based
are close to us in Silicon Valley, and see what some of the startups and companies are doing.
And then cooling, these are more exotic kinds of things, but clearly we have to, this comes out of MIT, we have to start to at least contemplate what can we do in certain parts of our planet to actively do something about the albedo. Adapt means, potentially totally different habitats. It means finding a way for humans to survive in a very different planet. And then
there's a colleague on adapting that's picture about floating cities, and who we worked with in San Leandro and in Oakland, like in the Bay Area, who had come from New Orleans and has moved to New Orleans and is working on what are the kinds of solutions as New Orleans knows the water is beginning to intrude. And so they're starting to look at what are ways to adapt, as well as to try to do some prevention.
And then, of course, critically restoration, right? We have to restore habitat. We have to find ways to improve our biodiversity again, bring it back to something that's livable for our planet. So now we're going to go into, okay, leaders, we are now going to show you that we're at the dawn of an entirely new era, right?
Remember those curves, right? The agriculture, the industrial, the digital. Well, now it's time that we're just hitting the wall on the digital, like so many things. AI, ChatGPT is so great. Look at all the things we can do, but we're hitting the wall because Earth is saying, you happen to live on a biological planet.
That, right?
This is in Phoenix, where my brother lives, and sometimes the wall is hitting them. So, if that wall is that red space, that we know it's something that is just stopping us in our tracks, that it's often what gives us then this energy to start looking at what's this new regenerative era and a new economy, because as we'll see, it's so urgent and it's such a crisis and people know it's needed that more and more funding is going into this every year. So these are some of the books that are out there by leaders, Paul Hawken, looking at ending the climate crisis in one generation, Bill Gates, how do we avoid the climate disaster? Speed and Scale is from John Doerr, and he is actually, if we go to the next one, so John Doerr and his wife Anne have funded Stanford to start a new climate school, $1.1 billion. They got other business leaders to join in. They got now all together $1.65 billion, the largest donation ever made to a university anywhere in the world, and to really start looking at climate issues. So we should be great to get in touch with them too, and begin to see what are the things starting to come out of there, and so that they know what climate reality is doing as a resource for them as well.
So these are, again, now we're moving into these economic signals, right? And so Credit Suisse came out and said the climate economy is about to explode, right? So there's something happening around the Inflation Reduction Act. B of A some time ago pointed out that fighting this change is going to be $150 trillion battle/economy, right? So we reframe this battle into economic.
Silicon Valley innovators, we think, okay, well, if it's going to be $150 trillion that somebody's paying, somebody's getting that. So that means that's at least that much about the funding that's going to be going into what are these new solutions? What are startups doing? What are communities doing? What are cities doing? What are companies doing? What are governments doing? So I think this is encouraging to know that we've transformed before. So I don't know if you've seen this picture in the past, but so the one on the left this is Fifth Avenue in New York City. So in 1900, it was all horses and carriages, and there was the orange circle is the one car that appeared on the streets. And it was only 13 years later, same location on Fifth Avenue, and now it's all cars and there's only one horse and carriage. So we know that when a technology comes about and people really want that, and there's all kinds of leaders from the manufacturers, and the city gets engaged, and who makes the signs and who makes the fuel. and everybody does something, that those transformations can actually be quite dramatic and happen quickly.
And again, this is a message we're giving to our leaders who we work with, is to say, look, we've done it before, and it feels familiar to them.
And
right?
it's time to do it again.
So
time for deep transformation.
So this is an interesting one where we're starting to see things, right? We're starting to see this thing out of Switzerland called Climeworks. It's a new plant that they're putting into Iceland. I'm sure you all have heard about it. It's going to pull down 36,000 tons in about 2 years from now. On the other hand, we have the Secunda plant in South Africa that's putting up 56.5 million tons a year, right? So you just see how far we have to go. The folks from Climeworks are talking about 1 million tons by 2030, 10 million tons by 2040. And these guys are putting up 56 million tons.
So this is one plant to one plant.
Right.
So we know how big the
it
challenge.
Just gives a sense of exactly the size of the challenge. Doug, the good thing is leaders are starting to step in, right? So again, we're trying to have the people we talk to emulate these other leaders. So Doc McMillan is saying, as a society, we're at an inflection point. If we don't do it now, we may not have the opportunity to do something later. These are really important messages.
Google also is really taking important steps. They've already offset their entire carbon legacy from the time they were founded, but they've committed to be carbon free by 2030. So right now what they're doing is they're offsetting carbon. They're still putting carbon up, but they're offsetting it. So carbon free, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They're not going to be putting any carbon up.
And they don't know how to do it. And so they say, we're going to, by us committing to that, we're going to participate in creating a whole new industry, totally different jobs that have to figure that out. This is one really significant, huge, basically a battery building as a heat pump, right? It's an interesting project that Google has done.
So the land around it is parkland because it's at the base, so you actually can go see it. Those are solar panels, the curved roofs. So it's quite beautiful. And so Microsoft as well, like at the president level, CFO, CEO, being carbon negative by 2030. They're going to remove any of the historical carbon by 2050. Anything they've ever put up into the air, they're going to get out, so that if there's greenhouse gas, it did not come from Microsoft. And because we don't know how to do it, they're putting $1 billion climate innovation fund. So that's when we say that there's resources there.
And from everything you've heard from us so far, you know that removing it by 2050 is not adequate, right? So, but it's an important signal. They don't know how to do it, so they create these consortia with Nike and other companies to say, what are you coming up with? What are your solutions? And so that's really a part of this regenerative era, as well as people work together that maybe never worked together in this kind of way. Startups, we're in Silicon Valley. Startups are fundamental signals of what's going on. Apple is now just announced that they're putting $200 million into carbon removal, again, beyond net zero, right? Net zero is not enough. So companies are starting to get that. Morgan Chase, 200 million in carbon dioxide removal. Frontier just funded Charm for $53 million. These are important signals. What we're seeing with VC funding, we saw an 89% increase between 21 and 22. It's happening, right? When you look at unicorns, these are companies that are worth $1 billion, startups that have sort of risen to the $1 billion valuation. There was one unicorn in 2015, in climate tech, one in 2016. By 21, there were 28 of them. So again, you see that $150 trillion is starting to get mobilized in the direction of we have to figure these things out.
Some of you may know Plug and Play. They have the world headquarters in Sunnyvale, opening up more and more innovation incubators, or a place for startups to get accelerated. And they have a number of different verticals in terms of, do they have one on energy, or they have some on construction? They have lots of different startups along different themes. They also have one on sustainability. So you can go, if you look at Plug and Play Sunnyvale, the website, you can see these, click on the accelerator you're interested in. Each one of these is a live link, and you can see what the startups are doing. And it's just wonderful to take a tour and get to see all of these. And these are also all accelerators that are specifically on energy, that are all around the Bay Area, around Silicon Valley. So I think we've had 9 of them specifically on energy. And Oklo is an interesting startup as well, quite a large startup, but they're doing nuclear. And what but they're doing small nuclear. So people are a bit worried about nuclear energy because they imagine 3 Mile Island or explosions and meltdowns. And actually the small nuclear can't melt down. It doesn't have enough mass to have a meltdown explosion like that. They take the waste from the other larger nuclear power plants, which there's a lot that can take hundreds to thousands of years to degrade. And then they can use that. And when they use it to get the remaining energy that's out of it, and then at that point, the waste from Oklo is just a couple hundred years. And then Blue Planet is in Los Gatos. They are getting carbon and sequestering it into concrete. Concrete and cement are some of the most kind of intensive greenhouse gas emitters that we have, and it's just everywhere, right? We've built everything with it, and roads and sidewalks. So they're pulling it out of the air and sequestering it long-term into the concrete. CO2 12 is got products that are CO2 made. They're taking it, not putting it into concrete, but putting it into everyday products that we use, lenses and glasses, the new kind of Tide laundry detergent. So they're making sure that we don't have to use fossil fuels for that, but we can use get the fossil fuels that are already in the air and turn it into the products we use. Novo Nutrients is quite interesting. They're also local, and I think in Sunnyvale, and they have microorganisms that are fermenters, and they ferment the carbon that would normally go in from smokestacks into the air, and the microorganisms take that and turn it into proteins that can be fed to fish and fish farms. And then we can end up with farmed salmon on our plates and have food that humans or
and so the side benefit
feeds.
of that is that instead of fishing fish out of the ocean to feed the salmon, you now can give them this kind of air-based.
Air miners is also quite interesting. They're local, I think, in Redwood City, and they are at airminers.org, and it's a network. So if all the people who are mining the carbon and greenhouse gas out of the air, being able to get together, they have a number of speakers. So they're also made of air, similar, taking carbon and making it into building materials that I think are really beautiful. This is an Audi dealership in Munich, Ether Diamonds, and then there's Air Vodka.
Hey. Bill Rose from Idea Labs doing some really interesting stuff. I just want to orient us to the Energy Vault for a minute. I'm from Switzerland, as I said before, and they're doing a project in Switzerland where they basically use gravity as a battery. So during the day when electricity is being created through solar or water in Switzerland, they lift these weights, and then during the night they drop them. It's much cheaper than any other form of battery. And currently they're building a huge battery in one of these gravity batteries in China. A really interesting development where Lisa and I are involved with now, increasingly involved with, is how do we take these bio residues, these biomass that's, garbage or food leftovers or whatever it might be, and turn them into the kind of products you were just talking about, right? Things that currently are made out of hydrocarbons, but we can make them into something else. And it's interesting, we're going to hear more and more about pyrolysis, because it's one way to take carbon and stabilize it to where it can be sequestered. Charm is sequestering, is turning it back into oil and then putting that oil back into the ground.
Another Bay startup that's
Right.
gotten funded for $53 million.
So these are interesting signals. We're involved in a project in Colombia that is creating a pyrolysis-based regenerative farming campus, basically, to teach people how to use, become carbon stewards, farmers, smallholder farmers, to become carbon stewards, think differently about their land, their soil.
And we actually met the founder of this because he came to one of the innovation tours that were happening, was as people come from all over the world to Silicon Valley to learn. And as he was starting to work with us, he keeps coming back, and we've been really trying to help him think through how he could do not just 1 or 10 or more, but how you can really get these pyrolysis machines to spread and scale much more quickly. So he's now starting to look at that.
Yeah, so that's what's interesting about this stuff. Remember, we showed you how we have a plant in South Africa that puts up 56 million tons a year, and we have a measly 10 million by 2040 coming out of these direct air capture things. We think that there might be a promise with these nature-based processes with pyrolysis, potentially. Again, it's early days, but we sort of calculate that if we get small farmers involved in it, if we get medium farmers, if we looked at all the possibilities that have, we should get to 1.28 gigatons was the calculation so far of, of basically capturing CO2.
It's just interesting because the machines already exist. They've been around for a long time. So a lot of the things that we saw before, they're new and they're new technologies and they have to be perfected.
So once again, you see that our intent is to somehow understand that we're talking about all these solutions, but nobody's talking about the gigaton problem, right? And what we're saying is, if we put our mind to the gigaton problem, we can start coming up with gigaton solutions. And agriculture, therefore, is one of those places where we know that there is a gigaton solution. If we take the carbon out of the atmosphere, out of the biomass, and we create more fertile ground, we can get to tens of gigatons.
And this picture came from one of the groups that's working over on the coast, also in San Mateo County.
Yeah, well, this actually came from Kiss the Ground.
Yeah, they were working with one of the farms that's over there on the
coast. All
coast.
right, so closing out, we're kind of close, but we're getting there. Leadership practices in this regenerative enterprise. So again, I just want to clarify why we took you on this journey is that our task is always to get leaders to wake up to the magnitude of the problem, and then also to the inevitability that we're moving into a whole new economy that they now need to step into. They need to participate in. And so there are different kinds of things.
To look at those 3 steps. One is how to help leaders get to see this big picture, see what's possible, get excited about it, commit to a big picture strategy of where they're headed, a destination. But then how do you innovate? How do you collaborate across people to really make an impact? And then how do you connect and how do you engage the people you need to make it real?
So the point, just to reiterate what Lisa said, is, fundamentally, we are not concerned that leaders get scared. We're not concerned that leaders are shocked by what we just shared. In fact, what we are thinking, what we believe is we need to get them to be shocked. The point then is you are a leader. Step in. When leaders get shocked, they can't just look the other way. You have had the audacity to put yourself into a role of authority, of leadership. Well, then your job is, with that shock in mind, bring in your people and put together something that says, yes, it's shocking, but together we can create the strategy. We can see the possible. Together we can innovate, right? And
we do have a lot of people saying to us things that we can't really let people see what the climate crisis is, because they'll be too depressed. They won't be able to handle it. And what we find is we presented with some leaders that had come in from
great story.
That were here from Argentina. And at the end, one of the leaders said to us, when you were talking, I just wanted you to stop. But, I think it's really important. And I think my work is going to be different from now on. And so.
And that's part of that third piece, is that it's going to be hard. People are going to be freaked out. And so that's that connect and engaging people is about the psychological role the leader has to step into and say, I'm there with it for you. This Lisa talked about earlier.
We saw before. And then just to let you know that now, kind of in the era of Zoom, that these are things that people can do in person, these kinds of maps, but also we've been working with them on Miro or on whiteboards, online whiteboards. So we've done a lot of this work where people were in very different locations, and it's great because they don't have to travel, use fossil fuel to go do the maps together.
What's so cool
about it, in person or online.
What's so cool about this process is you can see it a little on these folks it brings this kind of energy. We are creating the future together. We're picturing it. We're mapping it. We're creating a coherent.
So it's really what are the products and services? What do we believe? What's the work we can do? Whether we're a neighborhood, a city, a company, a government entity. How would we be organized? Are there departments we need? Are there partners that we need that we don't have? What are the talents and capabilities? We need to have people who know some of the things we don't know. And what's our identity and culture and values that we need to have on the inside in order to make sure that we really fully do all of these other things. And that's what they're mapping.
So out of that mapping, basically, yes, you're going to understand your footprint, right? What do we do? What do we do in terms of emissions? How can we reduce that? How can we take responsibility for that part? But the handprint part is really that more activated, hey, we can start doing things to cool things, or we can start to do things to take, to take down some CO2. We can do things to restore, parts of our planet in this kind of way to adapt. So that's the goal of the handprint, is beyond emission, beyond net zero, right?
And we want to make sure we have time to talk with you all too before you leave. So we might skip through some of the next ones pretty quickly, but we do want to say that giving voice is going to be also a really important part of this, that it's like, what are you going to do? But then also, how do you engage with other people about it to give voice to the visions, to get more people engaged and people to join?
We see that every time when we do this kind of blueprinting, is people speak about it with passion. They say, I see it, I can talk to my family about it. So anyway, this is familiar now. The question is, how can we turn everything we do into instruments of repair, right? What would be a ship, an ocean-going ship? It goes to the ocean. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Can it have sensors? Can it do something? There's
some students in Holland that are looking at cars and electric cars, and they've devised a cartridge system that as the car drives, it absorbs CO2. They put it in the cartridge. And so they go, when they charge, they exchange the cartridge. If any of you know Fuki Sushi restaurant in Palo Alto, we've had talks with Lumi Gardner and all the things that even as a restaurant, what are the choices they can make that around sustainability,
they have an amazing
and fish in the seas, but also what they're looking at with their climate footprint as well.
This is a fun one. This is a customer of ours in Germany, and they basically, they make car interiors, and they said, we are going to completely do totally different kind of interiors, but also we have to do different kind of energy. And they said, well, we want our community to start to learn about agrivoltaics. And so there's a whole new arrangement between this company and the neighborhood, the agricultural community. And so that's a part of
the farming fields.
Once a company starts thinking about their regenerative handprint, they naturally go to their surroundings.
So we're going to go now just pretty quickly into some of the, what do you do to innovate? And I'm going to skip through that one. There's some ways that we've worked with people and teach them to pitch. That's what the Co-Star book that we wrote was about, teaching people to pitch, so that if it's a large group, everybody, like if Climate Reality would decide to do it, everybody would pitch kind of using a similar format so that you could help each other and make the pitches stronger. And we've also worked with Idea Scale, which is also a local Bay Area company. They do a lot in Washington, D.C., but they're based over in Berkeley. And that gives you an online platform where, people can pitch in person, but then people can put their ideas online. Other people can see it. They can begin to add to each other's ideas. We did a whole in-person and online campaign with a company that was all through Europe. It was Switzerland, right? It was Holland, Spain, other countries. And so they could really share, they invited their people into an innovation campaign and got 86 ideas. People could exchange and help each other with their ideas and see them.
It was amazing.
Say, oh, we're doing that in Spain. We can show you how to do it over in Holland.
And the point of all this is the blueprint kind of gives you an orientation. It gives you confidence. We understand the world. We know what we want to do. This innovation bit gives people a sense of empowerment. It makes them feel like, yes, I can participate in creating a whole new set of products, services. We can do this.
You never quite know all the ideas that you have. So that's how to engage and connect your people and really be there for them. How do we help face this reality? What's the role of leaders in that? And part of that is for leaders to say, yes, people might feel hopelessness. They might feel fear, avoidance. They might be distracted. They could be in denial, or they could have grief. We know those are normal human responses, but how do we take that through these innovation activities or through having visionary strategies or the culture that we build in our organizations or our neighborhoods and cities and get people to move from those into courage, into being excited, into feeling creative, to say, we can do this. We're going to bring the best of ourselves to this. So not to be scared of these emotions, because we're going to feel those about climate every day when there's some new article or it begins to happen to us, to people that we know, to family members, to communities, the places we grew up. But how do we take that and use it as our energy and motivation to step in? And then finally, how do we use that to just work with courage and conviction? And also, just as a ending inspiration, why not make it beautiful? So this was a land art generator initiative that has competitions. This is solar. Doesn't have to look like the solar we're used to. This is wind energy. This is water, for wave energy and solar combined. This is how you can make a park and make it kind of playful. This is all solar panels. And this is like, just capture the spirit of the wind.
What I love,
it can look beautiful as well as something that can save us.
well, what I love about this one, this segment here, is that whenever humans go to a new era, there's a cultural element to it. The culture actually manifests this new era. And I think that's what you just pointed out here, is this is a part of that cultural manifestation.
Why not make it creative and beautiful? And then it's the ending to say, it's us. We're the ones. If people like us can't do this, can't support it, can't help it, can't encourage others, can't get more of it to happen, who's going to do this?
So there you have it. That's how we think about engaging leaders into this remarkable moment in time. And now we're going to have a conversation.
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you very much. That's very stimulating. And I encourage people to raise their hands if they have a question or a comment, and I'll try to, as best I can, take them in order. So, Ray, looks like your hand was up first. Unmute yourself and tell us what you want to know.
All right, thank you. That was a very good talk. It basically was convincing that the problem is very serious, and trying to get people moving, doing something. I think that's very good. On the other hand, if you get everybody moving, they're going fast, but they're not going in the right direction, we're not going to solve the problem. And we really need to look at the science and the data. You talk about the gigaton problem of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, and you talk about companies working on million-pound solutions when we have a gigaton problem. And we need to work with nature. For example, the best known method right now that I'm aware of to get greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere is ocean iron fertilization, as described by Peter Bykowski, and I put the link in the chat for that.
Great.
He describes 4 methods that can get us back to pre-industrial atmosphere and oceans by 2050 if we mesh that with getting to clean energy.
Yep.
So that's one comment. And then the other part is getting to clean energy. You can look at all the solar panels on the whatever facility it was, but realize by 2050, those are all going to be, every solar panel out there today is going to be beyond the end of its useful life.
Exactly.
Solar is not a sustainable technology. It takes 16 times the tonnage of mining to get a terawatt hour of energy compared with nuclear.
Right.
And you mentioned Oklo, they're on the right track. There's other companies that are probably farther along, like Copenhagen Atomics, which is a company gearing up their supply chain to produce 1 small modular reactor per day.
Wow.
And we get more companies like that out there, we can start to make a difference.
That's gigaton.
We have to, realize the direction we're pushing in and make sure it's the right direction.
And I would agree with you absolutely on Peter Bykowski's book. So it's called Climate Restoration, and he gives that overview, and he does talk about each of those 4 technologies. He did a lot of research to say if we were going to choose 3 or 4, what would be the ones that we could choose that we knew could really make a difference. They actually have been, Erica Dodds, who's been their COO, has been working out of our office. So we've gotten to know them quite well over the last year. And
We're
partly
fans.
because we were such fans of the work they were doing. So
Yeah,
and
I think that, that kind of thing is going to be much more valuable than these, standalone big machines that are powered by who knows what.
yeah.
And if you don't want to buy the book, the link I put in the chat is to his resources tab, where he describes all 4 of these methods in reasonably good detail.
Wonderful. Look at that. I think that what will happen
Okay,
is
there's a question in the chat. Oh, will the recording be available? Yes, it will be available through at least 2 channels. One is through YouTube, Sierra Club, and the other one will be through Climate Reality Project, our Silicon Valley chapter. So look for it there in a few days. Any other questions? Yes, Bruce, go ahead.
I'm there. I've been working on this for a couple of years now, and one of the things that I realized is that people need to take action consistent with where they're at. So if somebody needs to take action as a family, or as a neighborhood, or as a city, or as a state, or the country, or the globe, you can't say, go do this across the globe. People who aren't already doing that are not ready, and it's too confronting. It's like going up these stairs and the first one's 5 feet high. So you need to make steps that people can take, starting with things they can do for their family.
Right.
And it relates to that. And so I've been working on a roadmap. If we had a roadmap that described the kinds of things to do in each year, at each of those scales of family, community, state, country, globe, at each of those scales, we would present things that would make sense, that it would be ready for your contribution to. And so you just pay attention to the ones that you're ready for and interested in, and do things. So it starts to get people involved and engaged in the early stages. They do something and they talk to their neighbor, and the neighbor says, yeah, I was doing something like that the other day. And before you know it, they're doing something together in the community. So it kind of develops like that. It's organic.
Very nice.
And it starts in a very grounded way. And having a roadmap that starts to put these pieces together, it overcomes the challenge of people getting like, well, I don't know how to do that. That's not my field. That's not, it's like, and then they get, even though it might be a good idea, they might not really know it because it's not their thing.
So if you have that roadmap, or if there's any links to that or something that would be useful, put that in the chat so that people can see it, or if it's something we can look for later, kind of let the group know, because I think it would be really helpful to have that.
I'll send it to you, Lisa, and it's nice to see you again. I haven't seen you in a few years.
Yeah. So one of the things that reminded me of too was Cool Cities, and that we'd done some work with. So Cool Cities got some funding and chose 3 cities, started with California as a place that cities and communities could work together. And so they did kind of at least funding for the first year, and it might still be, some of it might be continuing. But so they did a large city in LA and medium size with Irvine, and the city for the small city was Petaluma. So I'd encourage you also to look at what Petaluma's been doing, because they had gotten funding to get some staff and start this, but to do it at the house by house neighborhood level and have the workbooks for people in the houses. And so they might still have those Cool City workbooks that they used, and neighbors would get together and have weekly meetings or monthly meetings and look at what they might all do together. But then the city of Petaluma, the town, would also host different events and do showcases. And so they've been really quite engaged. It's been nice to see what they're doing.
I want to build also on the community piece a little bit more that you were addressing. And that's about that online platform when we go into companies. So it starts with kind of a roadmap, just like what you described at the company level, right? That's that blueprint we talked about, and that generates orientation. We are going to step into this regenerative reality in the following kind of ways in our company. And then the second part, the innovation bit, that's why we like to put in an online platform so that people can see each other's ideas. They can connect with each other. They can help each other out. They can add to the ideas. So that's part of that kind of community development inside of a company around this shift to becoming a regenerative company, to look at people, to actively collaborate to make this actually happen. So I'm kind of reminded of that as I was listening to you.
Now, I'm aware that we're at the point of time where some people might have needed to stop for like the first hour of this, but we said there's this optional part where we're going on where we'll
Yeah.
still
So
be next half hour.
We're
So-
still here.
We so long as you're willing to keep answering questions, we actually allow quite liberally time after your talk. So if there are questions to be asked, I hope you can stay around and,
Yeah,
and
I see a
answer
few
them.
more.
What we're seeing is that other people, even in addition to us, may have answers to these questions
Right,
too.
please
Yeah,
say.
that too. Yes. Yep.
We
So
might have a lot of
yes.
answers.
So I said, if you have a question or a comment, maybe that comment's in the form of an answer. But so Jim, hi Jim again. Jim Thompson and Sandra is somewhere there. You have your hand, one hand up.
Yeah. So the disappointment from this presentation reflects the disappointment I felt when I heard Al Gore 3 years ago talking about this stuff. What I'm reading is that the number one thing we have to do is stop burning carbon. And the other part of the fossil fuel companies is that they control so many of our governmental agencies. And I didn't hear anything in the presentation about what we do to break the power of the fossil fuel industry and how we stop burning fossil fuels as soon as possible.
Well, it's an important observation. And, in wherever the world that we're in is that the focus on emissions is something that there is no evidence that we're making any kind of progress from within the context that we exist in, that Lisa and I are working in. And so we want to stop the madness of saying net zero by 2050. We want to stop the madness of saying we're going to cut emissions by 50%. It's not happening. So let's get real. Let's realize that while we're, and think of what Ray talked about. We can put up solar panels, but they're ludicrous at some level, right? We have the second installation of our house in the last 30 years, right? We are exactly in that place. The original one is now at its end of life. So we put up a new one. That's crazy, right? What went into these solar panels? So the point is that you're absolutely right. You're 100% right. It's going to take a revolution of sorts. That's not what we're talking about here at the moment. We're as disappointed as you are, right? We are not able to stop it. The fact that in the last year, we went up by 3.6 parts per million from something in the neighborhood of 220 parts per million over what we were used to now, from 420 to 423.5. It's madness, right? We had COVID, things went down a little bit, and as soon as it was over, back we are in the situation. So you're absolutely right. I have no issue with that, with what you're saying. But we're where we're putting our effort is to say, what is it that we can do, knowing full well that we're not making headways in that. And I think that's my.
So
may I step in here?
Yeah, and then I have
you talked about tipping points in methane, but economists talk about tipping points in the economy, and you showed one from horse and buggy to automobiles. Are you seeing any evidence that we're approaching that kind of tipping point?
Well, I think what I was
Evidence.
So it connects. So I don't think we're at the point where it's going to tip yet. But I do think what we are seeing is like that funding going into those new business development ideas. It's going to be really interesting to see what it is they funded so that what gets onto the market in 2 years and 3 years. Because I was thinking about, when you're saying this, what we really need to talk about is, how to make this big difference, is that it's a part of that's a political solution, right? So who are the people that know how to work in the government and know to work in the political solutions? That's going to be something that when regulations can change, how much emissions we can really put up. Can we continue to do this or not? A lot of that can be regulated. Other things is that the government can give incentives, right? So there's now a lot of incentives that that's fueling some of these new startups and other ideas. And so, but part of it is that we have to have something to replace it with. You know, if people are probably not going to just go from using lots of energy to no energy. Or, I mean, it's easier to say, okay, maybe we don't need to buy some of the products we buy, but usually they do still need transportation. They might work someplace really different. Their children might need to get someplace really different. So what do we have? How do we create this whole alternative, clean, green system? And I think Peter Fikowski's book has some of those, but a lot of the startups and other things that we're seeing and all these different incubators all around that have gotten some of this government funding is people are trying to create the alternatives. And then it'll be easier for people to leap through saying, I don't need to do this old technology. I can buy this new technology. It's still not easy. I mean, Palo Alto, where we live, is trying to help people change from gas water heaters to heat pumps. And, you know, how do you get rid of your gas stove? Well, not everybody remodel their kitchen and go to an electric stove. What if some people can't? So how do you get the products and how do you enable people to make that switch? So they're challenging. I think it'd be great to have
I think, yeah, Jen is right.
to really use this as a whole session in itself, but okay, how do you really get people to make that change?
Hey, Campbell, could I just say one more thing?
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I understand that Lisa and Herman are focusing on a particular part of the problem. I think it would be useful if you said somewhere in your presentation that we need to stop burning fossil fuels as soon as possible. And we need to break the power of the fossil fuel industry so they don't control government at almost every level. All of the
Good feedback.
All of the great things that you mentioned and that are in Project Drawdown aren't going to make a difference if we don't stop burning fossil fuels really soon, and if we don't break the power of the fossil fuel industry.
Totally agree. And I mean, it you know, that's where we started with this plant in South Africa that puts out 58 million tons a year. And on the other hand, we have, you know, Climeworks putting out 1 million tons. That it just doesn't compute, right? We have to stop it. You're absolutely right.
Well, and I think people that it goes together with here's what we're going to stop, and people having the confidence that here are these new alternatives, that we really do have some. And so we're not just going to leap into the abyss, but we're actually have a platform. We have something that we can still replace this with, or that life's not going to fall apart. And so that it's almost like, how do you work on both ends of that problem? Some will work on stopping it and some will work on having the platform that people can leap to.
Well, I see that I think, I mean, as you said earlier, we should have a long conversation among all of us about this, because it really, part of, Jim, part of where I am at is a level of frustration that says we're not going to be able to do what you're suggesting. And so what we can do is what Fikowski is suggesting. Let's get the nature back to into a shape where it draws down no matter what we keep putting up. We're gonna address we have to stop putting it up. But the speed with which that's happening compared to what we believe could be the speed of gigaton level solutions is where, from our perspective, we can't count on our ability to stop the emissions at the level we need to stop it. So let's get behind doing alternative things that actually bring that stuff back down.
Excuse me, can I ask, what do you recommend individuals can do? What should we do? You know, I mean, my angle, I write a blog that is about reduce, reuse, and rethink recycling. And what I usually tell people is, on an individual basis, pay attention to who we're giving our money to. Because that's, you know, that's one of the biggest things, I think, is that we're paying them the money to burn fossil fuels. You know, that's what it boils down to. So what?
It's great.
Well, I think
you're
kind of answering that question in a way by saying, I'd say look inside and see your own strengths, see where you can make the biggest contribution possible, like where your interests are, where you're not going to get distracted. You're not doing it because you think only that you should, but because you really care about it. Where do you have the passion for? And what do you have the capability and the skills that maybe someone else doesn't have, and step in at that point. And then what might be the things that you can get together with your neighborhood, with your community, with your city. A lot of the cities throughout the Bay Area are already doing a lot of different things and seeing what's your city doing, what's your community doing. Are there people to connect with there? Are there people on the state level? Are there activities through Climate Reality Group? Where can you join in together with others around the issues that you care about most? So look at your passions, your skills, and find a way to see what's out there and what people are.
I think I want to build on that just for a minute. So the first thing that Lisa, I think, was talking about is this idea of personal connection to this problem, personal motivation to do something, and doing something along the lines of what you said. It's a systems problem, though, right? As Jim just pointed out, and it requires us to all get involved in system level solutions. That's why we're, even at our age, putting our effort into companies, into large systems where we can shift at the systems level, the orientation. So I think you spoke to that quite beautifully, is, motivate yourself, do the things you can do, but realize it's not enough. Whatever at the community level, at the political level, at the company levels, that's where there's a really other dynamic.
Researchers can work with the researchers. People who know how to interact with government can interact with government. People who teach teenagers can work with the teenagers so that we get the next generation engaged. It's like, what is it that you care about most? Because the thing about, remember those life cycles where everything crosses the curve? Any of those jobs that you're in, or any parts of the community that you're interested in, those all need to move into this regenerative era, right? They all need to move away from the fossil fuel economy. We all need to figure out what would it look like in the regenerative economy? What would be the new version of this thing that I'm interested in, and help take that part of the world and move it into this new era. But they are beginning, like the new curves have that little, it's like that dip. Like you're experimenting, you don't always know what's going to work. It may not have already been developed. So it might take some experimentation in the area that you care about to realize all these things are going to be like startup projects, and that we're going to have to experiment and try. It's not as if it's already the mainstream, the developed. We've been doing it for 40 years and everybody knows exactly what they're doing. So be ready to be an innovator, entrepreneur, start something new.
I'm going to take a question off the chat for a moment. This is from Amy. What do you think of the work out of Post-Carbon Institute, which asserts that the bottom line is that we cannot continue to live as we have come to think of as normal in terms of energy use, and that we cannot create new technologies to replace fossil fuels that will allow us to continue to live the way we are accustomed?
Well, I think Ray spoke to that a little bit earlier as well, right? Is that we drive electric cars.
Yeah.
We know full well that it's not a solution. We've had solar installations. We know full well, given what we know about what's really going on, that those are not real solutions. So yes, we're going to see a fundamental systemic shift that we can't even quite imagine yet. I look at my grandchildren and I realize they're not going to live in the world that we can quite envision yet, but it's going to be fundamentally different.
Ray, again, your hand's up. You're next.
Thank you. So on the point of fighting fossil fuel companies, that's kind of wasting effort, because fossil fuel use will only continue to increase, except for to the extent that we have clean energy to replace it. We are not going back to live in the Stone Age. That's unrealistic. We're not going back to, reducing our energy use drastically. That's not realistic. It's, maybe desired by some, but it's not realistic. Realistically, we have to increase our clean energy to the point where it can support lifestyles similar to what we have. And so fighting fossil fuel companies, let's concentrate on getting enough clean energy, and then fossil fuel companies will fade into history. That's the only way to go there. The other point I'd like to make is environmental organizations like the National Resource Defense Council and Greenpeace and the Sierra Club, in organizations that do not support nuclear energy, I consider them all part of the problem. And I think before we can start to shift public opinion toward real solutions, we need our environmental organizations to get on the same page and start supporting real solutions, not things like solar energy, which is 300 times as deadly as nuclear for every terawatt hour generated.
Yep. Yep. Again, you know, I think here's what I think in the back of my head is you're absolutely right. It's really unimaginable to think that our lifestyles will change significantly and that we're going to find ways to basically live the way we're used to. The thing that I'm wondering about is that is part of the revolutionary transition, one where once, I mean, I just saw a paper that said 3 billion people are going to be on the run. What is that going to mean, right? You can't take your house along when you're going to have to move, right? Et cetera, right? So we're going to learn. It's going to be super interesting. I won't be around for it, but
we need enough clean energy to eliminate energy poverty worldwide.
Yeah,
we need to eliminate scarcity worldwide. And to do that, I'm optimistic. I think we can do it, and I think we can do it in the time we have if in parallel we work on climate restoration the right way.
right.
What makes you optimistic? What are the things you're seeing that gives you hope in that?
Last November, I went to a nuclear energy conference in New Mexico, and there were companies from all over the world that were very impressive on what they're doing. The Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. has billions of dollars allocated to supporting nuclear energy. There's a company called Curio Solutions in the U.S. that is commercializing a proven chemical process that can turn spent nuclear fuel into new fuel and industrial products and medical isotopes. And we need nuclear energy to get rid of this 500,000-year problem of spent nuclear fuel. We need it to get rid of nuclear weapons stockpiles, which I think we'll be able to start on once we eliminate energy poverty and scarcity. So, you know, that's kind of the real solution to energy, not just small modular reactors, not just the reactors we have, but there are, you know, 50 different types of reactors in development right now, and we need all of them.
Yep, yep, yep.
I also just saw I was just looking at some of the chat as things came in and just saw a response back to you from someone who's a Sierra Club representative who thoroughly agrees with you. So
it's happening. It's happening.
It's happening. That's good.
It's good. Yes.
Okay, I think we should wrap it up here. I'd
Great.
like to thank Lisa and Herman for what is obviously a very stimulating talk based on the questions and comments that came afterwards. I'd also like to thank Gary Latshaw, if he's still on, or thank him in absentia, and Lisa Barbosa, who are Gary's on both Sierra Club and CRP, and Lisa's in Sierra Club, and they have helped put the series together. We have another talk arranged for a month from now. It's entitled Turning Animal Waste into Fertilizer. So another part of what I think is actually has to happen, it's all of the above. You know, there's some solutions that are obvious. There's some that are marginal, but might work out if they get developed. And we just got to keep trying and pick the winners and try to cut the losers as quickly as possible. So thank you again, Lisa, Herman. We'll hope to see you all on the 12th of July is the talk about animal waste and fertilizer. Thank you all very much.
Looking forward to it.
Bye.
Stop the recording.